Hi, hello everyone, and welcome to this webinar organized by WeUni in partnership with the University of Manchester. My name is Carolina, nice to meet you all, and I'll be your host for today's event on behalf of WeUni. I see here that the first people are already starting to join in. We're going to wait just a couple of minutes before starting to allow everyone to connect. In the meantime, feel free to say hi here in our chat on Zoom, and please tell us where you're from since we are very curious. Okay, so first of all, I want to thank everyone for joining us and thank our panelists for being here with us today. As you can see here, I'm not alone. I want to introduce you all to Amanda McCorkindale, that is a senior lecturer in humanitarian studies, and Amy Chapman, student marketing recruitment officer. Welcome to all of you. It's a pleasure to have you here. Today we are going to discover all the online courses in humanitarian studies in the University of Manchester. We know that in a world facing growing conflicts, natural disasters, and humanitarian crises, the need for skilled responders has never been greater. So right now, student crisis management and humanitarian response equips you with the knowledge and tools to navigate complex challenges and drive meaningful change. And you can do by attending online courses, so wherever you are. So today we are going to discover all the courses that the University of Manchester has online in this field. And of course, you also have the possibility to interact with our speakers and ask them questions. So, talking about that, I like to remind you that after the presentation of Amanda, we will have a Q&A session where you'll be able to ask direct questions to the panelists. So don't be shy and just type all of your questions in the Q&A section here on Zoom, and we'll go through them at the end of the webinar. Also, another important information for those of you interested in receiving a certificate of attendance by WeUni for this free masterclass, stay tuned because we will post a link to get the certificate at the end of this session. Okay, so I see some other people joining, and I also see some people that is writing in the chat from India, from Guatemala. So welcome. It's a real pleasure to have you connected today with the University of Manchester in Humanitarian Studies. So I think that without further ado, I can now leave the floor to Amanda for the presentation. So enjoy this webinar and see you later. Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining. This is so exciting, and thank you very much, Carolina, for the lovely introduction. I appreciate it, and to WeUni for hosting it as well. This is a very exciting opportunity for us. As Carolina said, I'm a senior lecturer in humanitarian studies at the Humanitarian and Conflict Response Institute here at the University of Manchester. I'm originally not from Manchester, I'm from the US. I was born and raised as a teacher. And I worked in a number of schools, and I've since kind of made my way into the humanitarian sector. And I've been working and teaching in this industry since 2011 now, doing my PhD with HCRI and lecturing ever since. So I'm very institutionalized between HCRI and the University of Manchester. So hopefully between myself and Amy, we should be able to have the answers to most of the questions you should have later on. To give you a bit more background, let me just share my screen for you so you can see it. There we go. Hopefully everybody can see that okay.
Yes, perfectly.
Bad. Just to give you a little bit of background, I'm a senior lecturer, which means I teach on a number of modules that we offer. So both undergraduate modules, postgraduate modules that are on campus, and I also teach on our online programs. At the moment, I'm teaching on one of the modules there, but in the past, I've taught on a few others. And I was the postgraduate teaching director for a number of years, probably for about 3 or 4 years, up until September. But I was on sabbatical in the fall term, so I'm just kind of getting back into the swing of things now. And it's such an exciting opportunity to tell you a bit more about the programs that we offer. So to kick it off, I'm going to take you through the programs that we have online, and then I'll also talk to you about what the modules kind of look like and what you can expect from them as well. So first, to give you a little introduction, because I know you all are kind of dialing in from and joining us from around the world. So just to give you a look at what Manchester looks like from overhead. So this is our city centre where the yellow is, and then the University Manchester campus is down on this southern bit that you can see here. And our building is this one just here called Ellen Wilkinson. And one of the things I'd have to say about our online program, and something that I always love seeing at the end of the degree process, is we actually have a lot of our online students who come onto campus to attend the graduation at the very end. So because it's a part-time degree program, we get to know our students over a number of years, and we really get to engage with them, have conversations with them. So to get to meet them in person when they're in their graduation gowns, it's incredibly special. So hopefully, when you get to that point of the degree and you're ready to graduate, you are welcome to attend the in-person graduation ceremony. And it's something that I know our students look forward to, but we also look forward to as your lecturers. So hopefully we can show you the campus in person one. So for those who haven't attended the earlier webinar, I'm first going to take you through what is the Humanitarian and Conflict Response Institute, because it's a very niche department, and it's one that sometimes it can be a bit more challenging to kind of figure out what our drive is really. So I'd like to take you through the background of it a bit. So HCRI was created in 2008, 2007, 2008, and it was a coming together of a number of different academics and practitioners. So in fact, one of our founding directors was Professor Bertrand Tate, and the other was Dr. Roni Brauman, who was the past president of Médecins Sans Frontières. And they actually met in the archives of MSF. And at the time, they were both doing research into some of the past responses that MSF was involved with. And they realized that there wasn't enough time or capacity to properly understand the mistakes, as well as some of the successes that were made in responding to disasters and crises. And we were really doing a disservice within this response as MSF, but also other humanitarian workers. One of the things that history has always taught us is that by studying history and the surrounding issues that go into that, we can better learn from those mistakes. So hopefully we don't repeat them going forward. And this led to the creation of the Humanitarian and Conflict Response Institute. And taking it beyond just that historical discussion, we also recognize that it is a very, not just multidisciplinary field where you have different disciplines working together, but it's very interdisciplinary, which means you have to understand what the different disciplines, what the different people involved in responding to disasters, what they're doing so that your work is more effective. So as someone who might be a medical doctor, understanding how logistic supply chains work is imperative to ensure that you get the medicine where it goes, or thinking about the engineering feats in order to get things where they need to go. So thinking about that, and also thinking about how conflict might also impact, or insecure environments or global warming, for example, how that all impacts and drives the way we can and do respond to disasters and crises. So the Humanitarian and Conflict Response Institute really takes this to heart. So our core focus within HCRI is first the humanitarian response itself. We also look at global health. We look at peace and conflict studies, as well as international disaster management. And I'll take you through what each of those four kind of mean, and then we'll look at what that means for the online programs. So for a humanitarian response, what I mean is we're looking at how aid agencies and governments, how they kind of come together and respond to these crises. So how are they working in these sectors? So how are organizations responding? We're thinking about natural hazards, conflict, man-made disasters, global health pandemics as well. A lot of what we talk about in the humanitarian response side, we might be studying things like Haiti and Rwanda, and also looking at some of the more recent crises as well to understand what were some of those challenges that they faced at the time. We'll analyze the role of the states within the humanitarian response. So how are governments responding to it? For example, within the US, the fact that they've just cut US aid has a massive impact in the humanitarian sector, both within the US, but also their partner organizations that were benefiting from some of that funding. So what are they doing now? How do they go forward? Um, what are their options? So thinking about that as well. So what are the ripple effects of some of the actions that you hear about or read about in the news? We also discover what humanitarian response looks like for those who are affected by the crisis. So while we might be thinking about the government and the organizations and that top-down kind of approach, we're also thinking about what does that look like for people who are affected. So my personal research is on empathy. So how do we understand the other person in all of these situations? And how can we teach people using empathy to better understand those who've been affected by these crises? Because when you hear about a disaster, when you hear about a conflict, sometimes it's difficult to grasp when you're talking about 10,000 people having been affected. What does that mean for an individual within that number of 10,000? What does it mean for that family? So really kind of bringing it back to the grassroots side of it and understanding the community-based aspect of these responses. Because at the heart of everything we do are the people who are affected by it. So I think we're very much driven by keeping that as a focal point within our institute. And finally, we also look at and think about how crises can be prevented and better managed in the future. So managing crises is such a big concept. Like, how do you manage a disaster? But it is something that we try to think about those root causes because they are man-made. All of these crises are man-made in some respect. So how do we kind of break that cycle, or how do we think about putting in better measures to ensure that it doesn't happen again in future? So that's our humanitarian response aspect. Our next is global health. So our online program first started specifically with our global health program, and it's since kind of branched out since then. But when we're thinking about global health, we're thinking about health inequalities, we're thinking about access to healthcare as a whole. We're also thinking about how pandemics and things like that can impact and kind of, oh, I've got a Q&A, let me look. And also how that kind of spreads throughout it as well. So when we're thinking about how do we understand global health, we're thinking about how global health also affects the people throughout the world. So what does that mean throughout different countries, but then also within specific countries? What does that mean in different areas of the country or socioeconomic disparities? And how can we kind of lessen that unequal impact? We also consider and discuss to a large extent the responses to pandemics in the past as well as in the present. Everyone, unfortunately, was familiar with COVID. You have to have been familiar with COVID now. Can that be prevented in future? How can we prevent it in future? Things like the use of vaccines and how they're being rolled out, how to afford them, and what should we be doing in future? What is the best way to kind of respond to this? We're also looking at who provides medical humanitarian response. So one of the biggest criticisms of the response to the earthquake in Haiti back in 2010, while the outpouring of help was immense, the level of medical care wasn't consistent, and at times it caused more harm than it did good. So for some of that, we kind of review who should be providing medical care and how that goes about. So one of our founding directors, Dr. Tony Redman, who was an A&E consultant, so an emergency medicine doctor in Manchester. He was in Haiti, and he's been responding to crises around the world since the early 1980s, I think. He's only just retired. I think he's come out of retirement about 3 times now. Anytime something happens, he comes back again. So he came back, he was retired, and then COVID happened, and he was then the director of our Nightingale Hospital here in Manchester. Then he retired again, and then Ukraine conflict happened, so he went back again to help because that is just the way Tony works. But one of the major findings that Tony kind of saw in Haiti was that doctors could go in and kind of operate outside of the system. They could provide medical care without much responsibility in the care that they were providing in terms of any paperwork or any comeback from it. So what Tony did to kind of address this was within the UK, he created an organization called UK Med, which is the UK's official medical response to any disasters or humanitarian crises. And when thinking about that, um, it's a register that he's kind of created so that doctors have to pass all of these kind of tests and certificates and show that they're able to practice medicine throughout the world, because medical licensing only should work in the country that you're licensed for. So by kind of joining one of these organizations, it then recognizes your ability to provide medical care wherever you are in those responses. But there are certain remits you have to kind of meet, including being invited into the country when help is needed. So I've just seen a question that's come up regarding global health. So I will answer this now just to kind of clarify it. So when I'm talking about global health, the question is it health all over the world, including Africa with its chemical waste, and Europe with its sectoral diseases, and the US with its cancer? So when we're talking about global health, we are kind of talking about the entirety of global health. Um, it depends on the module that you're taking, and we'll go through some of those later on. But one of the modules that I teach is ethics, human rights, and health. And within that, I speak to my students and we discuss what is the human rights framework in terms of global health. So access to different types of medicine, or if we're talking about sexual and reproductive health, then what does that mean in different countries? So we might be doing a case study of different countries, but for students, I'm also asking them to look at what that means within their own country or neighboring countries, um, and how to apply that and how to think about that. When we think about Africa, we use case studies about Ebola, and we think about the use of that. And within the US, we do talk a lot about health inequalities and insurance. So depending on the module that you're taking, it is very much how do we understand the wider picture of global health? Because each of these countries have their own approaches, their own challenges within it. But trying to recognize that there are still aspects that are very interconnected. So the healthcare that is happening, for example, in Canada will be impacted by the US and vice versa. Because if you can't afford healthcare in the US, are you going to go to Canada to get your medication, to get your surgery done, things like that? Is that a possibility for you? Or thinking about, as we saw with COVID, if there is, or with Ebola in certain areas in the northwest part of Africa as well, if there is a weakness in that quarantine or in the response, will that disease spread more quickly? So how do you kind of communicate and work with one another to strengthen the global health program that's there? So we are talking about the whole kind of spectrum of it. And some of the other modules, there's another one called Health Systems that kind of looks at how these systems are connected as well. So I hope that kind of answers your question. Um, so the next aspect when we're talking about global health is we look at that worldwide improvement of health, reduction of disparities, and protection against global threats. So that kind of answers what we were just talking about a moment ago in terms of what is global health. But how do we improve it? And how do we ensure that we can become, we use the word resilient a lot, and I'll still carry on using it, even though it's a definition we debate and define pretty frequently. But it's something we should be debating and defining, like what makes a community or group resilient to this. So when we're thinking about health, how can we make communities more resilient going forward? How can we improve health outcomes, reduce childhood mortality and morbidity, or thinking about maternity rates as well, and how can we make sure that we are kind of helping those in other areas. And finally, the last aspect of global health, understanding international, national, and local approaches to global health, including an awareness of the problems and critiques associated with bottom-up approaches as well. So one of the issues, not issues, but I would say that one of the aspects that does come up in our courses is that we are incredibly critical. We question everything all the time. Including the humanitarian organizations that respond, the government responders, the local actors, everyone is equally kind of criticized in the work that we do. But it is so that we have and support our students in asking the right questions. So going in and thinking, how can this be improved? And what is currently the weaknesses that are there? So Federico, I will come back to your question later on as well. Your question is it possible to apply even if I don't have a background in humanitarian studies, but I have relevant professional or volunteer experience? Yes, you can apply. There are certain like language requirements and things, which we can talk about later on. But in terms of having a background in humanitarian studies, I didn't have a background in humanitarian studies when I came to do the master's initially. My background was in education. So my passion around that was actually, I would volunteer and I wanted to help the community that I was living in. And that's part of my motivation in getting involved. So a lot of our students don't have a background in humanitarian studies. For those that do the online programs, they still don't necessarily have to have a background in humanitarian studies. There's one degree where you do have to have more of a set background, which is our humanitarian practice degree, but I'll talk to you about that in a minute. But you may also have relevant professional or volunteer experience that could kind of fit those remits. So I'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to that section. So our next aspect of the four kind of criteria is peace and conflict studies. So when we're thinking about peace and conflict studies within the aspect of our online programs, we're kind of trying to understand how war, conflict, violence, what are the causes of them? So is it resource scarcity? Is it power dynamics? What is driving that conflict? Is it historical? Is there something else that's come up that is kind of creating this tension? Because until you understand the causes of war and conflict, you can't really work towards finding a solution to them. You can't get past that conflict stage without understanding, well, why does it happen? What is that root version? And how do we then overcome it? And then we think about how some of those processes of development, so strengthening areas that may be seen on the global stage as a bit weaker in terms of their development side, is that actually creating some of those aspects that may cause conflict, those seeds of conflict? So for development projects where you are in fact looking at a refugee settlement, for example, a lot of funding might be going into that to provide the refugees and those who are displaced with food, water, sanitation, housing, etc. But the local population just outside of that refugee settlement, who may be incredibly poor and very much in need of those same resources, aren't able to claim for those same things because they're not in that same situation. So will that create tension between the local population, the host community, and those who have been displaced and those who are refugees? And that's something that you see a lot around refugee settlements and things. And how can you kind of dissipate that? So do you need to do more programming with the host communities to ensure that it settles any of those tensions before conflict may arise? We also analyze how conflicts are resolved both from the international, national, and local level. So conflict management. Understand the consequences of conflicts, especially with regards to displaced people. So we're talking about, the movement of people from Ukraine, or thinking about the movement of people around the world when you see a conflict happen. But what does that actually mean? What does it mean to be displaced when you aren't necessarily recognized as a refugee, but you can't go home? What can you do? So we try to understand that and think about what are some of those aspects that are in place to support those individuals, and what are some of the challenges there. And we also explore some of the processes through which actors have attempted to define and build peace. Some define peace as just the absence of war, which is a very hardline stance. So if there is no war, they're at peace. But does that actually mean peace? Or is that just there is no war? Or are you just waiting until the next war happens? In which case it's this very uneasy situation if you're just waiting for the next war to happen. So how can we create an actual peace? And what does that look like? We also think about after a war, how do you create post-conflict justice? So if we think about, and how is this interpreted at different levels? So if we think about the Rwandan genocide, how do you find justice when so many people within a nation were complicit in that action? Or if you think about when it's on that scale, is it possible to hold people accountable? Is the International Criminal Court, does it do enough or does it not? And what does that post-conflict reconstruction, how do you build those bridges again? So if you're at war with your neighbors and then suddenly a peace accord is signed, is everybody just okay to move forward? How do you make that actually happen? So those are some of the aspects we look at. And we also engage with conflict management, resolution, transformation, peace building, state building, theories, and practice. So it all kind of comes together so that you understand them. So that way, when you're in the situation, if you are working for an organization, let's say MSF or the Red Cross, and you are in the midst of a conflict zone, understanding how that precarious balance between both sides is working and your role in the midst of that. And what does that look like? And how might that complicate your job in terms of getting help where it's needed most? So our fourth dimension, I know I'm going off topic for each of these. Amy's probably like, oh, Amanda, you're going. I can see it happening. But that's just the way I lecture anyway. So she probably is aware that's how I go now. So the final one is international disaster management. So this is when we're looking at how natural hazards, so the things that we expect nature to do, it's not something, it's not a surprise. There are earthquakes, there are hurricanes, there are tornadoes, there are tsunamis. These things happen, right? That's not the problem. The problem is when a human population is in the place where these natural hazards hit and they aren't fully equipped or prepared to respond to them, to cope with them. An earthquake that hits Haiti, that's at the same magnitude that may hit LA, will have catastrophic damage in Haiti, whereas in LA, they'll be fine. The buildings can deal with it, they can cope with it, there won't be a loss of life. Whereas in Haiti, it will take them years to rebuild, if they can rebuild from it, because it's still a challenging situation. So when we think about that, how do we better prepare people to manage disasters, to manage these hazards so they don't get to the point of being a humanitarian disaster, this international one? So we look at things like we investigate how disasters affect people and how they affect people differently. So how might a disaster affect if, for example, there's flooding in a local community, how might that hazard of flooding affect the local population? Do you need to think about how different people within that group are going to respond to that flooding? Or do you have the same expectation that everyone can just leave with the same ability? And they can. If you think of the elderly evacuating their homes, or if you think of those who we think about the elderly thinking about those who have dementia might get very confused about leaving their homes and how upsetting that would be. How do you get them to a safe place? Or think about very young children evacuating a school. If flooding happens in the middle of the day, how do you evacuate a school and where do they go? And then how do you contact their parents so they know where they are? So there is so much more than just thinking, remove the people from this situation. We have to think about how different people are affected within those situations and then put plans in place, kind of like a risk assessment to best support them in that response. So we learn about concepts such as vulnerability, resilience, governance, disaster risk reduction, as well as sustainable development. We understand disaster preparedness, response, and recovery. So how do you prepare for a disaster? How do you respond to it? And then for the recovery process, how do you break that disaster cycle so that it doesn't happen again? Because if you just rebuild the same way that you built before, and you've seen that those systems, those structures are vulnerable, it's just going to happen again. So you need to break that disaster cycle. That's part of the management process within that response and recovery aspect. You break that cycle so that way it doesn't happen again. You look at the infrastructure, you look at, was it the evacuation routes? Were there main challenges? And how do you respond to it in that way? Last year, I went to Barbados doing some research with one of my colleagues who he's a lecturer in international disaster management. And we were looking at local schools. So that's where I came in with my teaching background. And when we were thinking about how do you evacuate the school if there was a hurricane that hit, because they're very susceptible to hurricanes and to tsunamis, and we realized all the roads to that school were bridges, which meant that those bridges would likely flood in the event of a hurricane, um, and that school would be isolated. So how should they better prepare so that if it was isolated and those bridges were all washed out, how long, what supplies did they have that could sustain it as an emergency shelter, as it was the shelter area of that area within Barbados. So you would have a large number of the local population staying there without any hope of the roads getting people in and out. So you'd be waiting on helicopter responses to get any resources or goods to them. So thinking about that as a vulnerability and a possible weakness of that area, and then thinking of how can we better respond to it. And saying that, that is one of the strengths, I think, of our course as well. So again, going off piece, all of our lecturers are researchers in the area that we teach about. So all of us have our own kind of research interests in the area that we go and we're spending time to understand what this means and how then we can incorporate it into our teaching so that you can have that as well. And you can have those conversations with us about what we're thinking about or what are some of the biggest challenges the sector is facing and how can we then improve on it going forward. We also consider the different organizations who respond to disasters and how individuals themselves cope in these situations. And we account for the effect disasters have on political, economic, and social structures of societies. So they're quite big concepts. And then the overarching umbrella of these four is how do all of these connect? And how can we make sure that even when we're looking at disaster response, we're keeping in mind the possible ramifications in terms of conflict or the global health impact of this in terms of disease outbreak in a disaster situation. So that brings us to our courses. So we have three of our online courses that I'm going to talk to you about today. So we have our Global Health Program, Humanitarian Practice Program, as well as the International Disaster Management and Humanitarian Response Masters. But I'm really going to focus on our Global Health and Humanitarian Practice ones, I think. Dennis, I've just seen your comments. So you're based in the Philippines and you are already exposed to a lot of disasters, and common problems are water and ready to eat foods. Exactly. So having potable water, so drinking water, is one of the major issues, one of the major challenges that comes up from either tsunamis, flooding, etc. And thinking about what that looks like in terms of having that water available, but then also how do you access it and provide it to communities that aren't kind of that are more rural. So if you're not near the major cities or where the humanitarian organizations where they're kind of placed, how do you get the drinking water, or what aspects might you have that can help you better prepare for it? Or as individuals, can you kind of stock up to a certain extent to have ready to eat food available, or have the drinking water tablets, things like that, so that you can kind of become more resilient within your own household. But it is yes, a very common problem within it. And the other issue with it as well is you don't know how long that'll last for. So depending on where you are, you might be prepared for 2 to 3 days, but in fact you need it for weeks. If we think about within Puerto Rico after the hurricane hit there a few years ago for Hurricane Maria, they didn't have electricity in some areas for months and months and months. So what impact is that going to have in terms of communicating with each other, but also in terms of preparing food and things like that, and having that, running refrigerators or any aspect like that of keeping food from going off. So having that ready to eat food that you can kind of use and have it prepared is incredibly important. Sorry, I am getting over a cold, unsurprisingly, in this Manchester. So to take you through some of our online programs, I'll first just instead of kind of having these on the slides, I thought it would be easier to take you through the website for it. Um, because then I can talk to you a little bit about it, but also show you where to find the information so you can refer back to it later on as well. So for the MSc in Global Health, it is a 3-year part-time program. And within this, you can expect to kind of take one module at a time over that period. And each module lasts 10 weeks or so. So it's a 10-week taught aspect, but the modules are asynchronous. So asynchronous means you can kind of do the course at its own pace. And you can kind of respond on discussion boards, things like that. So timing wise, you can respond when it suits you, when it works for you. In terms of live aspects for these online modules as well, we have generally four live sessions that you can attend. So within my ethics, human rights, and health course, there's an intro session and there'll be a concluding one. But there are also two in between where we're talking about ethical cases specifically. So we're thinking about the ethical responses. So for each of the different modules, it varies a little bit. So within the MSc for Global Health, there is the aspect of doing a different pathway where you kind of specialize, as we talked about already within HCRI, you can specialize in one of those different pathways. In terms of funding, it is for UK students, £4,800 per year. International is 9,333, which is very specific. We do offer scholarships and sponsorships. So I would say have a look on the fees and funding page, which you can find here. But we do award postgraduate scholarships every year around this. So make sure you have a look on that. I think that answered the second question, hopefully, but have a look at the scholarships that are available. And then the next. How do the programs engage with real-world humanitarian crises? Are there partnerships with NGOs, UN, or other organizations? We'll come to that as well. So, as I said, one of the online programs that we do is the online Masters in Global Health. One of the others that we also offer is, let me just bring it up for you. Is the Masters in Humanitarian Practice. So when we're looking at the Masters in Humanitarian Practice, that was actually created by in partnership with Médecins Sans Frontières, and that degree is very closely designed for practitioners who are working in the sector. So for them, they're working full time in situ around the world, and they're doing these classes on top of their day job, so that they can progress within MSF or within the Red Cross. We've also had people working from different medical military backgrounds, working for the Royal Navy, things like that, so they can better understand their role in this wider dimension. Yes, we have a number of partnerships, including let's see if I can bring it up actually. So if we look there, maybe not. If you have a look on our website, it takes you through all of our partners, but we work incredibly closely with them, and our alumni are kind of scattered across these organizations as well. Every year we have a careers day on campus, and we do a lot of that online as well on our YouTube channel. But we work with organizations like Halo Trust, the Minds Advisory Group, MSF. We also work with the UN and advise on different programs. We work with the World Health Organization and advise with them. So it's more, I think we've got quite a lot of partners within this. So have a look on our most up-to-date ones. But it is, they were, see them there, I think. But we kind of strive on creating these really strong aspects and these really strong partnerships within it, because we're trying to help them in terms of them understanding what's kind of going on and benefiting from our research to push this forward. But then also it's reciprocal in terms of supporting their workers and providing that that research that they desperately need. So yes, we do work quite closely with them. Oh, and thanks, Amy. You fit the full link. I told her beforehand, my multitasking sometimes with kids is it's out the window. I can do one thing at a time now. So I hope that's answered that. Um, Excellent. So some of these questions I'll go to afterwards as well. Um, Good questions. Okay, very good question. Let me take you through this because I think this will answer that final question as well. So the question that's come in recently is that they graduated in management and leadership. They've been exposed to displacement emergency response here in Mozambique. Thanks for joining from Mozambique. Um, but through the triple nexus strategy, humanitarian development peace, is that considered crucial experience to attend the peace and conflict response program? I think that gives you a very good insight to some of what we will be discussing. We don't, within the program, we don't assume knowledge that people are kind of coming into this as experts in the field of humanitarian response. Because we want everybody to kind of enter at the same level. If you're doing a degree in humanitarian practice, there are different expectations to an extent because we do assume that you are working within the sector or have experience in the sector. But for the global health program, we don't necessarily. Understanding and having that management and leadership background puts you at a bit of an advantage, if I'm completely honest, because one of the modules that we do teach is around the triple nexus. So you could be taking that online module and have quite a good understanding of the foundation. So then you can push yourself in terms of having that higher level analytical discussion that you can add to it, as opposed to trying to get to terms with what is the triple nexus. So for those watching who don't know it, triple nexus is how peace, conflict, and the humanitarian sector, how they all kind of push and pull against each other. So you provide aid in an area that creates instability, which might then lead to conflict. And then if you try to develop the area to reinforce that or to deal with that, it then creates a humanitarian crisis again. So you have this constant kind of push and pull aspect. So that's one of the things we also look at. So when you think of the different courses, you do have some of those core modules. So let's go down and have a look at those. So if you go into course details, you can see some of the different aims for the different years. The main aspect is that you would be taking some of the core modules that are there. You do have a choice of optional modules. If you want to do one of the pathway options, then you would choose modules that are kind of representing either the disaster management aspect or global health aspect of it. And then in your third year, you write a dissertation, which is your own kind of research. And it should be an original contribution to knowledge, is what we say. So you might have found during your research that, let's say, as Dennis kind of said earlier about looking at how access to clean drinking water and what that means where he lives, then he could be thinking about, well, how have they dealt with that problem in somewhere else in the world? And could you then apply that theory or apply that response within his own case study and think about that, what that means at the local level within his community? And then either conducting possible surveys or doing research around what that looks like, you would then create your own research and write your own dissertation on that project. So there's a lot of scope in terms of what you can do for your dissertation. And we've had students who have then gone on to have that that work published later on and things like that. So there's a lot that can kind of go forward with it as well. I see we're almost out of time for it. So, and there's so many questions coming in. I'm trying to keep an eye on them as well. Some of the main things before we kind of move on is to think about the modules and what you can expect when you're learning within that. So each of the online modules, you have two assessments really. So one assessment is your larger assessment, generally an essay, something like that, or it might be a project. And the other aspect is responding and interacting with the discussion board. So this is every week logging on, writing up your comments, and then submitting them at the end as a journal so that we can make sure you're understanding and kind of giving you feedback as you go. We don't have any time tests. That's one of the biggest things about H2I is we don't think students perform well under that kind of exam scenario. So you don't have to think about it in that way. And we'll help you as well in terms of essays or providing guidance. If it's been a while since you've written an essay, we have an amazing library here with essential skills training that you'd be welcome to kind of participate in and take part in. And kind of going forward from that, then hopefully you'd be building up your skills on that as well. Let's see. Let's go back to this. So the humanitarian practice, the biggest difference for that, as I said, is you need to kind of have this background in the humanitarian sector. And this is the flexible online postgraduate program in humanitarian practice with a close partnership, as I said, with Médecins Sans Frontières, Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine, and Manchester. So for this one, we partner with LSTM. So the modules are kind of split between us and LSTM. And there's also on-campus residential programs. So I think there are two separate weeks. One is hosted by Manchester, one is hosted by Liverpool. And here you can see the students having come to Manchester. So that's in Ellen Wilkinson. And during that time, they have some hybrid modules that they're doing, that they're kind of taking part in and getting to know each other as well. So if you have that humanitarian background or experience, then this might be the course that's more kind of geared for you. Most of the people that are taking it are humanitarian, well, they are humanitarian practitioners, but a lot work for MSF or they work for similar organizations. So it also builds a really strong network in terms of career aspects, things like that, kind of going forward. So and they've got fascinating experiences as well. So I have to say I love teaching when they come onto campus. It's really quite exciting. So I'm gonna zoom through slightly. For the entry requirements, it's a lower second class bachelor's degree or overseas equivalent. And there are also alternative qualifications as well. So if you don't have a bachelor's degree, please speak to the online program director because our online program should be something that makes education more accessible. And that's what we want with our online master's program. So you might have been working in the humanitarian sector for a number of years and you've been writing reports and you've been doing case studies, etc. So you might have the skills that a master's is the right thing for you. What we don't want is students joining the master's and setting you up to fail. And so we just want to ensure through the entry requirements that we can support you through this process. There's also English proficiency exam as well. So minimum requirements are either GCSE English grade C or 4, IELTS score of 7, as well as no less than 6.5 in any component. And this is important because you are expected to read a lot and write a number of essays. And we found that students that have a lower score than this really struggle with that. But I would say, if in doubt, then message the online director or message our admissions team. They can help you with that as well. So I'm going to wrap it up and finish on a quote from one of our past students, Walid Adam Al-Haj. He said, "I've truly enjoyed the practical and applicable nature of the course, content and how it could be directly implemented in my work field as a humanitarian aid worker in Yemen. I truly appreciated the quality learning content, which was tailored to the operational context of my work and had markedly contributed to leveraging my knowledge of key global health topics, challenges, and strategies." So I think one of the main aspects to think about when considering humanitarian response as a degree or the online programs is it is meant to be more flexible and fit around your schedule. It's meant to work with you as opposed to having this kind of rigid system where you're on campus and doing a full-time degree. So thank you for listening to me kind of harp on for a little while. I'm going to have a look at some of the questions that are coming up now. So we have, what role does fieldwork play in the master's programs? Are students expected or encouraged to complete placements abroad? So for the online program, fieldwork does not kind of come into play within that. There are some aspects for some of the modules where you'll be asked to um, conduct informal surveys, things like that. But for the online programs, there at the moment is not fieldwork. I know the one of our previous online directors, Darren Walter, who's throughout our HCRI website. Let me stop sharing so you can see me better. So I can see the questions better too. He's very interested in kind of having a residential module to kind of bring into the online health one, but that we're not there yet. So hopefully that should be coming soon, but it's not quite there at the moment. But yeah, some of our on-campus programs have research visits. So there's one in the postgraduate one that we've done in the past, which is researching the legacies of displacement or conflict, I think, which has traditionally kind of gone to Uganda and looked at the refugee settlements there. But it's not a core component within that. Next question that we have, how does the University of Manchester approach the ethical challenges of humanitarian intervention? So ethics is my passion. I think I didn't come into HCRI with ethics as a focus of my research. It was in education. But while I've been here, it has become the forefront of my thinking. So much so that I teach the online module on ethics, human rights, and health, and I also created one for my third year students called ethical decision making under pressure. So in terms of the ethics of humanitarian responses, we are very critical around, the role of individuals and organizations and states in terms of, is it ethical for them to be responding, or how best can you respond? These are conversations that we have across the Institute, but then also with partners. So we've done a bit of work with Marc Dubois, who's another past president of Médecins Sans Frontières for the UK, who was looking at ethics and decision making of the organizations, because even the decision of where do you respond or where do you choose not to respond is an ethical decision within that humanitarian intervention. You don't have the resources to go respond everywhere and help everyone. So how do you make that choice? And for a lot of humanitarians, how do you live with that choice after? So I mentioned him earlier, but Tony Redman, the guy that's responded everywhere, when he actually did retire, one of the first things he did was he went back and got a master's degree in ethics and philosophy, because he had made so many choices and that cost people their lives, choosing who to help and how to help them. That he wanted to understand the decision-making process, and he wanted to understand and make sense of his career within the humanitarian sector that spanned for so long. And it's something that, if you read Hugo Slim, he's written a lot around humanitarian ethics, and I really enjoy his work and find it very insightful. But when you look at these very complex ethical decisions, there is no right answer. You're choosing from two wrong choices, and it's trying to figure out which is the less of those two evils that you're kind of going for. So for our students, it's how do you identify that and how do you work through it and then make the decision, an incredibly hard decision, kind of going forward. And thinking about that, some of those aspects for our students, it is very challenging, the topics that we discuss. So we do encourage students to kind of think about different support networks or think about counseling, the University of Manchester counseling service, things like that, coping mechanisms, because what we talk about every day is some of the hardest material you can think about or find. So we do try to really support our students in how they kind of interpret and work through that material, so it's safe for them to do it, and it's something that they can make the best use of kind of going forward. But I think it's important to note that, because within the humanitarian sector as a whole, mental health is something that many people do struggle with. So we also try to prepare our students in that respect of how can we make them more resilient when they're going into that sector. Dennis again, so Philippines has 20 to 26 storms a year. Can you help us on the latest system of past disaster management programs? So that is probably slightly outside of my remit, Dennis. But I think hopefully what we would be able to help with if you were to do the program is think about researching that aspect. And within our disaster response sector, they will have the latest discussions of the disaster management programs. But then how do you apply that within the Philippines? And we've had students in the past that have come from the Philippines and the surrounding areas as well, and then go back and work within government agencies there or the Red Cross there. So yeah, I think hopefully we can equip you with the skills so that you can bring that back and apply it within your local community or the state community as well. The next question we have, are there alumni working in organizations like the Red Cross, Medicine Sans Frontier, or the UN? Yes, we have alumni working across these different organizations. And in fact, a couple of years ago, I created a LinkedIn group specifically for HCRI alumni so that we can kind of stay in touch with everyone. And our online community is included within that alumni network. We encourage everybody to join and interact with each other because it makes a great opportunity for future networking and things like that, and also job postings or in things like when COVID was happening and some of my students were online, being able to talk to each other and think about what some of those challenges might be that they have. So yeah, we have thousands of alumni at this point on the LinkedIn community. I think we have about 500 or 600 people that are there. So a lot of opportunities to connect with people around the world for it. Currently, I'm in my final year in my undergraduate program, and my medium is in English. Can I participate in this program? Yes, as long as you kind of meet the degree requirements, that side of it, then you'd likely be able to apply without any problems for it. I would say speak to the admissions program, but based on the statement you made, I think it would be pretty straightforward to apply, and I think you'd be pretty successful. And then the next one, since there are variations in time zones, how can the online program be accessible for all countries? As I said, so for this person, they're from Ghana. The majority of the content is asynchronous. So what we do is we kind of create a brief between reading, podcasts, recorded videos, so that students can work through all of that at their own pace. So you might find that throughout that week, you're picking up different chunks of it and you're working, might take you 4 or 5 days and you're just doing 20 minutes a day on it. Or it might take you, you do it in an hour and a half or 2 hours in one day. Really depends on how you work through it. But then you respond and interact on the discussion board. You write your answers, you ask your questions, and myself and my colleagues respond to that. Your peers will respond to it as well. So it becomes a very vibrant and interactive community. So I have students currently that, or during the COVID example, so one of my students was in Italy working in a hospital, and I had another student that was in Mexico. And the student in Italy, they were in the hospital that was running out of oxygen. They were the first hospital that ran out of oxygen on the wards, and he was panicking and he was asking about ethically, like, how do I allocate oxygen to patients? Who should I be giving it to? So the community on that module came back and we talked through different options in terms of resource allocation and the ethics around it. And then we also had the student from Mexico saying, thank you for raising this because our hospital is currently already kind of facing these restraints. So he was able to kind of take it into account and prepare for that wave of COVID coming beforehand. So things like that, of learning from one another and supporting each other in that way, I think is incredibly important as well. I think that's all the questions in the Q&A aspect. Have I missed anything, Caroline?
I don't think so. I see that you made a really good job. Thank you so much for managing this part too. So of course, thank you for the really interesting and complete presentation about all the academical offer of the online courses. Oh, I see another question from Dennis mm, that says that he wants to upgrade the knowledge on disaster management programs, hoping to be updated on the next seminars. I have a lot of experiences, but disaster management is very important.
Thank you,
This.
Dennis. Yeah, I completely agree. Our students are very passionate about what they're doing, and I think it is something that in the with climate change and the current global crises that we're facing, this program is more needed than ever. Um, so I think it is incredibly important and something that we hope hopefully I'll see you on it, Dennis, next year, the year after. It would be great to have you kind of participate in it. They're also thinking about it. We are thinking about it in terms of the masters as a whole, but there are aspects that if you start the program and you've done the first year and then you change jobs or you have different life commitments, you can always exit the program earlier with either a certificate or a diploma. There are things like that. We encourage all of our students to go for the full master's because it helps you a lot in terms of your career progression. But if you think, oh, I'm not sure about a 3 year commitment, it's quite a daunting thing. We've had students that have had to, take breaks because life happens. So I think the biggest thing is to always talk to the program director or speak to your lecturers, and we can help you manage that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And of course, thanks to all the people that joined us today and thank for all your questions and curiosity. I've just shared in the chat the link to get the certificate of attendance for today's webinar. So if you click, you can request it and you will receive it via email. In case you have missed something from today, you'll receive an email with the recording of this webinar. So you can take a look at it again and take all the information that you need. And another information in the email that you will receive, you will also have the contacts from University of Manchester. So if you have any other questions, maybe later or that you haven't typed in this session, you can ask to University of Manchester, and of course you'll receive an answer. So thank you so much for being here with us today. Of course, we hope to see you again in the next webinar organized by WeUni, maybe in partnership with University of Manchester. So thank you, Amanda, and thank you, Amy, for your support. And have a really nice rest of the day. Thank you so much.
Yeah, have a great day.
Bye
Thanks,
bye.
everybody. Bye.